courtroom. The defense is going to do their opening statement. Attorney Renner, you can proceed anytime you're ready.
Thank you. On December 3rd, 1998, Mark Jensen found his wife in their bedroom, motionless. He called 911. When paramedics and the police arrived, they found a distraught mess of a man in Mark Jensen. His eyes were red from the tears streaming down his face. There was snot bubbling up from his grief. He had trouble standing while talking to the police and to the paramedics, trying to explain what was going on. And he directed them to the back bedroom. Prior to 1998, to December 3rd, 1998, the Jensen family was just like any other family. They had good days. They had bad days. The Jensens were a middle-class family. They loved their boys, and they worked hard to build what they had. Julie Jensen was a smart, educated woman. The kind of woman who, despite the fact that her higher education was in nursing, was able to self-study and gain her Series 7 stock brokerage license. Mark Jensen was a successful stockbroker. They had 2 sons. But like any other family, the Jensens had their problems. Back in 1990-91, Julie Jensen cheated on her husband. She ultimately did file a divorce proceeding, but in the end, she stayed. She stayed with Mark Jensen and her boys in their home. And Julie is diagnosed with depression. In the following years, you heard about these pornographic pictures left around the home, a constant reminder of the infidelity. Yet, at the time, everyone believed those to be sent by Mr. Tarika, who's the person that Miss Jensen had the affair with. On advice of police, Mr. Jensen hired a private investigator to get to the bottom of these photos. And I believe you're going to hear, and the evidence will show, that Mr. Jensen was not leaving these photos around to be found, to be harassing. As I stated, though, Julie Jensen was diagnosed with depression first in 1991. Ultimately, she ends up getting medications. She goes to therapy. But here's the thing. mental illnesses don't just go away. You're going to hear multiple witnesses talk about things that Julie Jensen said to them. One of the stories you're going to hear is that there was a day when Julie Jensen was caring for her children at home, as well as other children in her home. When she called the parents of one of these children, one of her best friends, Laura Coster, and said, "Your son just smeared feces all over my bathroom." Laura called Mark, and both of them rushed home to figure out what was going on. Yet when they got there, there's no feces all over the bathroom. There's no smell of cleaning products or anything that would have explained why it's not there anymore. You're going to hear that that was the point when Laura Coster decided that maybe Julie shouldn't be caring for my child anymore. You're going to hear about a day when Julie was at her dentist's office in the weeks leading up to her death, crying, upset, and saying that she wanted to take her life. And you're going to hear from multiple witnesses about things that Julie told them that were inconsistent with things she told other people. She told some people that Mark was forcing her to get a job since her youngest was about to start school. She told others that Mark steadfastly refused to let her get a job even though she wanted to go out and work. You're going to hear statements that Julie made to neighbors, to acquaintances. But the people in her family, she never told any of them about any worries about Mark. And every time that someone asked her, "Hey, let me help you. Let me help you leave," she declined that help each and every time. What brings us here today is Julie Jensen's suicide. The suicide of a woman who was in declining mental health, who was seeing her family doctor, a family practice doctor, for prescriptions for her mental illness, for her depression, not a psychiatrist. And as you listen to the evidence, at the very end of this trial, you're going to be asked to answer one question. Did the state prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Jensen caused Julie's death? Or did they prove to you that Mark Jensen wasn't a great husband, and was kind of a jerk. Because those are two very different things. After Julie Jensen's death, an autopsy was performed. Dr. Chambliss can't determine a cause of death based on the autopsy, but based on crystals in the kidneys, ethylene glycol poisoning is suspected by the Kenosha medical examiner. Dr. Long is hired by the prosecution and concludes that ethylene glycol was the cause of Julie Jensen's death. And he claimed it was a homicide based on faulty math and faulty facts. Dr. Mainland, another of the state's witnesses, is in agreement with the cause of death being ethylene glycol poisoning, right up until the liar, the snitch, the con man and cheat Aaron Dillard, who has everything to gain by helping out the DA's office, and who has access in the jail to every single one of the documents that Mark Jensen had in his cell pertaining to his case, comes forward. And then, in 2007, Dr. Mainland, based on the statement of this con man, this liar, this cheat, says, oh, actually, cause of death is suffocation. After almost a decade of saying it was ethylene glycol, the statement of one liar who you heard from the state in their opening statement is a liar, and who had all of the documents he needed to create a convincing story right there in Mr. Jensen's cell. Everything changes. Now, one of the witnesses you're going to hear from is Dr. Lindsay Thomas. Dr. Thomas is a medical examiner who has done thousands of autopsies. She will tell you exactly why this theory of strangulation is flawed.
Objection, Your Honor. There's no theory of strangulation that's been described by the state or anybody else.
I'm going to overrule it. Again, folks, this is opening statement. It's not evidence, and the attorneys are just basically telling you what they might prove. So, again, it's not evidence. You don't have any notes. Go ahead, Ms. Renner.
Or smothering, I suppose, is a better word for what the state is claiming. Dr. Thomas will be able to tell you exactly why that is not supported by the scientific evidence, by what was found in the autopsy. And you're also going to hear from Dr. Stacy Hale. Now, Dr. Stacy Hale is a medical toxicologist. One of the things you'll learn about is the difference between medical toxicologists and forensic toxicologists. Medical toxicologists deal with the living. They deal with people who are coming into the emergency room, suffering from poisoning, suffering from other issues that have a toxicological basis, which is a big fancy way of saying it's got a chemical in the body basis. And she's going to be able to explain to you exactly why Dr. Long's testimony Dr. Long's analysis and Dr. Long's findings are all flawed. Flawed because of bad math and not supported by the physical evidence. When you're listening to the evidence in this case, one of the things that the judge will tell you, and already has told you, is that it's up to you as the jury to weigh the credibility, the believability of the witnesses that are put before you. So who are these witnesses? Jail snitches like Aaron Dillard, known con man, liar, and cheat? Jail snitches who have everything to gain and nothing to lose by coming forward with evidence in this case that they discovered not from conversations with Mr. Jensen, but by reviewing the materials that they found in Mr. Jensen's cells. Witnesses whose stories just don't add up. Stories about a late night conversation at a hotel that isn't supported by anyone else that was there. People who had every opportunity to listen to that conversation and again, you're going to hear evidence about these flawed witnesses and what kind of people they are. The type of people you can believe, or the type of people that gossip and who you can't trust when they state things. Witnesses who only come forward almost a decade after the death of Julie Jensen. And reliance on statements of Julie Jensen herself, who the evidence is going to show is an unreliable narrator. She tells people on one hand that she wants to work and her husband won't let her, and tells people on the other hand that she doesn't want to work, she doesn't want to do this, but her husband is making her. Julie Jensen, who is mentally ill and suicidal based on her own statements at the dentist's office. Julie Jensen, who refused to leave despite telling people that she was afraid for her life. Julie Jensen, who had access to the family finances, who had her own car, and had a husband who worked all day. And Julie Jensen, who is not computer illiterate. You are going to hear that Julie Jensen was in charge of the family's finances. And she didn't just write down in her checkbook what she spent in the balances. No. She used a program on the computer called Quicken. A program that required her to go on the computer. Let's talk a little bit more about this computer evidence. Because the computer evidence from the Jensen home computer you're going to hear came from a single user on the computer. Now remember, this is back in 1998. The days of dial-up, right? We all remember, well, maybe not all of us, but a good chunk of us are going to remember that obnoxious sound that the dial-up modem made. We're also going to have to remember that this was the days before you could stick your internet connection into your wall for the cable, before the days where you had a separate line that came into your house just for internet. In the days of dial-up, you had to plug in the computer to your phone line, to your landline in the home. Now the state makes a big deal about the majority of the computer activity, because not all. The majority happens after Mr. Jensen comes home from work and the entire family is at home. But remember this. If you were in a dial-up situation, and you were on the computer and the school called to say that your son was sick or there was an emergency, they got a busy signal. The evidence is going to show that Julie Jensen had just as much access to this computer. The evidence will show that both Mr. Jensen and Mrs. Jensen used this computer. And wouldn't it make sense if, when you are at home and your kids are at school and your husband is at work, that you want to have that phone line available in case something happens? And that you, as a responsible parent, would do your online searching when your whole family is at home, when you don't have to be worried about what your 3-year-old is doing running around the house, when you don't have to worry that every second you spend on the internet could be the moment that the emergency call is coming in and getting a busy signal instead of being able to get a hold of you. And as far as the searches on December 3rd, the morning, if you look closely at that search, you're going to see that they started around 9:40 in the morning. And you are going to hear testimony from Ted Voigt that Mark Jensen left the home at 9:15 that morning to bring his kids to school. And you're going to hear, and this is probably pretty gross to think about, but in Julie Jensen's stomach contents, there was food, described as peppers and potatoes. Why is that important? Well, if Miss Jensen is well enough to get up and eat, is she well enough to use a computer? Now, most of us have done searches on the internet, on Yahoo or Google. It doesn't take the most intelligence to pop up a search engine and type in some words. And Julie Jensen, a smart, educated woman who lists on her resume computer skills, who is using computer programs to track the family's finances, is not computer illiterate. What Julie Jensen was is a mentally ill woman. She was a mother who suffered from depression, and a person who made allegations against her husband not to the people that were closest to her in her life, but to acquaintances. Julie Jensen is an unreliable narrator, and the evidence will show that. The evidence will also show that Julie Jensen was at high risk for suicide. Dr. Sarah West is one of the people you are going to hear from in this trial as well. Dr. West did an analysis. She did it post-mortem, of course, but she did an analysis of Julie Jensen, and she's going to explain to you exactly why Julie Jensen was at high risk for suicide. Now, one of the things that you hear often in courts and when we're talking about the jury trial system is innocent until proven guilty. Mr. Jensen is innocent of his wife's death. As you analyze the evidence, again, the one question that you have to answer is, did the state prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Jensen caused his wife's death? Here's the thing, the answer to that is no, because he didn't cause her death. Julie Jensen took her own life. The evidence will show as much. And at the end of this case, all of the lawyers will come back up here and they're going to ask you to find, from the state, you're going to hear them ask that you find the defendant guilty, to find this innocent man guilty.
Objection, Your Honor. The state's not going to ask the jury to find this innocent man guilty.
Again, it's opening statement. Let's just show what you're going to do in your case, Ms. Renner.
But the evidence in this case is absolutely going to show that Ms. Jensen was suicidal. The evidence is going to show that Mr. Jensen, while not being perfect, is not a murderer. And for that reason, we will be asking you at the end of this case to find Mr. Jensen not guilty, to hold the state to their burden of proof, and ultimately to weigh all of the evidence that you hear, because that evidence will prove to you that Mr. Jensen is not a murderer. He is innocent, and he is not guilty.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start the evidence portion.